get to the living population, which I believe has been affected by migration from the Near East, but not as much as some people think. Some people will think that all of the modern Egyptian population today is simply Arab and was simply replaced. I don't think that from a demographic point of view and from historical data that that's very likely. I don't believe it. But it doesn't take a lot of migration from a foreign population to influence the genes of another population. 1% per generation, and you come back 2,000 years, you can have a huge, huge difference. Now, this particular Y chromosome marker is called the TAC 49AF marker. And basically, TAQ stands for Thermus aquaticus. Thermus aquaticus is bacteria that lives in hot springs, like Yellow Springs in the U.S., and it's used to slice DNA. And without going into a lot of details about this, these markers are based on mixing up DNA with this marker. And this is what we get. We get, for Egypt, in a huge sample, north to south, we get 13.9, 39. So in total, and I should say the markers 4, 5, and 11 in this case are all indigenous to Africa. They all have the highest frequencies are found in Africa. They correspond to some other genealogical lineages, which I'll talk about in a second. And another sample from Egypt, 52, you get similar numbers. 61% of 5 and 11, along with 7.7% of the 4. The 4 is what's found predominantly in sub-Saharan and tropical Africa. We do find frequency in Egypt and obviously in Sudan, but it's found predominantly in tropical Africa. That's not the most important part there. In 7 and 8, it's found in Palestine. So you see Lebanon, Palestine have a high frequency of 7 and 8. 12 and 15 are more common in Europe. You have in Libya, again, over 60% from these 4 haplogroups that again are found in Africa. And I'm going to show you that those haplogroups are actually connected. This is just some more information, again, on those same haplogroups. Berbers in Morocco, over 70% have some combination of those markers. The greatest number, though, for the Nile Valley, for Berbers, is the haplotype 5. You see other populations here from the Near East that are very different. So when people say, oh, they're just all Near Eastern people, they're all Arabs, based on these Y chromosome lineage of these markers, this is not the case. Mitochondrial DNA is a little bit different. When you look at Lower and Upper Egypt, you see the breakdown. You see in Lower Egypt, the haplotype 4, at least in this one study, the haplotype 4 is only found in 1.2% in Lower Egypt, Northern Egypt. But as you go south, you find increasing frequencies, and then you find the reverse for the haplotype 5. Now, let's look at what these represent. Let me just tell you, haplotype 4, haplotype 11 in the screen that we've seen, and haplotype 4, all the members of the E haplogroup genealogically. And I'm going to show you this in a second. This is a Y chromosome DNA tree. Haplogroup A, and these trees are reflective of genes that are found on what's called the non-recombining portion of the Y chromosome. It's inherited father to son to son to son. In other words, these are not things subject to recombination, so you don't get any of this from your mom. These are straight lines of descent. All right? Now, haplogroup A is essentially confined to Africa, although you'll find the odd person outside of Africa, even right here in Britain, with an M91, which is haplogroup A. Haplogroup B is also basically confined to Africa, but it's scattered all around the continent. Now, the marker, the SRY 10131.4, that's at the node where you see A coming in to be in the rest of the group. Most human males share that SRY. Oh, it's only the people in haplogroup A who don't share that marker. Every other human male does. And even more so for M168, which is sometimes called the Eurasian atom, which is a mistake because it's the African Eurasian atom. Just to sum up, most males in Africa belong to haplogroup E, 73 to 80%. It doesn't matter whether they're Berbers, it doesn't matter whether they're Egyptians, it doesn't matter whether they're Congolese or Khoisan. The PN2 transition, and I'll just point this out, the PN2, which comes off of the M68 gap, this is the family tree. PN2 had two sons, so to speak, M2 and M35. And M35 is found predominantly in an arc from Ethiopia up to Egypt, over to Morocco, and into the Sahara, but also in some other places. And M2 is found in the rest of Africa. So although you will have Berbers with blonde hair and blue eyes, and although you will have people who don't look like what people think of as a stereotyped African, and that's a problem, nobody thinks that the person from southern India and the northern Chinese are both not Asians. So you should not have any problem understanding that there should be African variability. This has to do with social history. This is the latest and unreadable but revision of the Y chromosome tree, but it's got all the latest markers on it. But once again, and it's got some refinements, M75, M33. This is the E haplogroup, and all of its wondrous detail. And let's talk about, if you focus only on the twigs, the bottoms, and you only did those markers, you might understand everybody's different. Everybody's different. But so we need to look at major trunks. So it shows us PN2 had these two sons, if you will, that led to that. Here's another clearer illustration of it. This is the M35 in the older language, slightly older, 3 years old. E3B, bulk of the M35 Y chromosomes. And here's some data that actually you wouldn't have seen unless you saw Benson's book. I was able to get some unpublished data and from Mike Hammer's lab at the University of Arizona. And if you look up there at number 1, you see that you get similar results. M35, 54%, generally M35 for the Egyptian region. And curiously enough, you get some M91, not curiously, actually to be expected. But also, with these particular samples, and geneticists don't get to sample scientifically. What they're doing is getting material actually opportunistically. The Egyptian government doesn't let people just come in and say, oh, we want to take your DNA. So this is gotten in other ways. But I wanted to show you too. So you see basically a picture here from most samples of them having haplogroup E, more than 50%, 60%, 70%. In some samples you have haplogroup, you have the M89 lineage, which is more common in Palestine and Arabia. And in some samples from northern Egypt, you get a higher frequency of that. Well, that's to be expected. You have to be very careful, again, about reading these things. Understand that, just imagine, you're living in your village or your oasis, and say you adopt some new marriage customs, whereby men can have 4 wives. So a guy comes in, he has 4 wives. You can propagate a lineage, a unique lineage, just with a social custom alone. You cannot interpret particular numbers and frequencies as indicative of the founders. I'm done.